today. But perhaps we'll start at the top. We'll start with the regulation, the regulator. And Naif, if I can put you in at the deep end, if that's quite all right. Where does fintech sit within, at the CMA, at the Capital Market Authority, within the government, within the kingdom? Where does fintech sit on that kind of road of enabling the future for the country?
Well, first of all, thank you, Simon, for having us. And it's an opportunity to maybe give a glance to the audience over here on Saudi Arabia and the latest development in fintech. Rest assured, the Vision 2030 has in eyes every single detail in order to enable the country to be one of the top countries in the globe. So, under the umbrella of the Financial Sector Development Program, there has been the fintech strategy, which I'm sure a lot have heard about, on May that was launched. And this would group the whole efforts in the kingdom to serve this pillar of fintech in the kingdom. So, saying that, the CMA's vision is aligned with that. So the approach that CMA have taken, it's one of maybe some regulations that already have taken, which is the sandbox approach, and we call it the FinTech Lab. And this environment, any innovations, any new product and business models are enabled to try and maybe be introduced. There's always the question of how can you regulate the non-regulated? And throughout this process in the FinTech Lab, the entrepreneur or the business owner would have the ability to show and experiment their products in a precautious and flexible environment at the same time. For us as the capital market, Simon, we also get the knowledge and findings in order to craft a new regulation or maybe even an existing regulation that fits to this specific business model or fintech. What I would like to also say, since the beginning of the year till now, we saw a quadruple in funding and SMEs in the kingdom. So I'm talking over 1 billion riyals. And when we talk about that also, we see the sectors that fintech is supporting, mostly in IT, retail, real estate, health, and education. So these sectors which were untapped maybe previously or didn't have an alternative and investment methods now are enabled through fintech.
Thank you very much, Naif. Naseba, perhaps we could turn to you. Actually, we've got three fintechs, scaled and scaling on the panel. Listening to what Naif has told there, what's it like at the receiving end of the regulation? How much easier has it got for you in your journey, and maybe perhaps sort of set the scene a little bit in terms of where you've come from and how long your company has been around.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Simon. So
Little
Furos
bit.
began, yeah. So Furos began in 2018, and at the time there were no regulations. So we were, starting out from scratch and kind of exploring with our regulator, which is the Saudi Central Bank. What can we do to facilitate fintechs like Furos at the time to begin their operations? It began as a very slow but steady progress from preparing the infrastructure for us to launch and become operational. It was a journey of going back and forth, understanding the market, understanding the infrastructure, the operations, and then all the players that we had to work with. So it's not us just working with the central bank, but we also work with, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Communication, and we had to set up the right ground for that. Now, from there to today, things have come a long way. A lot of APIs have been set up to facilitate and empower us to serve our customers in a quick and easy way, to empower them to run their businesses and give them the necessary needs to be facilitated at that time. So, just last week we received the B2B API for NAFID, which is the Ministry of Justice, where we could sign digital promissory notes against their loans, which is a great step towards further digitizing that process. And with financing, with debt financing, we actually have many a very long workflow that we must go through. Unlike digital payments, which are a bit easier to facilitate. So yeah, things are definitely come a long way.
Just to follow up on that, Naya mentioned there there's a four times growth in business SME financing. Presumably, you as a crowdfunding platform is a bit of a beneficiary of some of that growth.
I mean, from day one, we've seen astronomical interest from both sides, from SMEs who are looking for financing, as well as individuals who are looking for funding. Year over year, since we've started in 2018, we've grown around 250% year over year, which is astronomical, and we're very proud of that number.
Sultan, perhaps we can come to you. What's your experience been like? Over the last couple of years, the pandemic has obviously made the business case for consumers needing other means to pay, non-cash means to pay. How is the landscape changing in Saudi Arabia, and how is business for you there?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. As you mentioned, that within the pandemic, that we saw a lot of merchants that approaching us to enable the e-commerce and the acceptance, and also we saw that from the behavior of the cardholder, the customer, that they are not using the e-commerce business or the applications with the pandemic, that we saw growth and a good number of transactions that happened during the pandemic, and the support that what we get from the government and from the other entity and the Saudi fintech, that the educating the people and the cardholder and giving an offer and a discount coming from our central bank for some of the acceptance and the interchange, that was grateful from the government and from the support during the pandemic. And also, I think last 2 weeks or 3 weeks that Samadi announced that 50% from the electronic acceptance that growth in the business in the market in Saudi. And after the pandemic, we saw still there is a growth in the business for the digital transactions and the convenience for the customer during the acceptance and during the usage of electronic payment during the pandemic, yes.
Okay. Renier, on the your sort of more physical payment side of things, how has that changed? And what was the impact of the pandemic on your business, and how has it helped you scale there?
The pandemic was great. Yeah.
No irony.
From a digital payments point of view, I was going to say at least one thing to get everyone to wake up. And
yes. We need it. We need a bit of coffee over here, I think.
Yeah, no, the other thing is, I just want to say my mother, she's 86. She would be so proud of me sitting here and calmly waiting to be the fourth in line. As a firstborn, that's a huge test of patience. Anyway, the pandemic has been good for digital payments everywhere in the world. And Saudi Arabia is no exception. And the regulator has been very accommodating and facilitating in the transition that the payment sector has had to make. The Saudi regulator, and that's who we are talking about in particular, is one of approximately 12, 13 regulators that I've had close dealings with in my career, and they are by far the toughest. They're also the most accommodating. There is this, on one hand, a really tough regulator that, BaFin in Germany or the FCA in the UK, they would look at SAMA and say, oh, that's a tough regulator you got there. On the other hand, we can have dialogue with them about innovation, about facilitating changes that need to happen in the ecosystem. What I would say, though, about fintechs is, and it applies to JD as well, regulation is important, and you need to spend about 1 hour a day thinking about it, and think about it hard. But the other 11 hours, you better think about your customers, and that's what we are trying to do. So, we think an hour a day really hard about how do we comply, how do we get ahead of regulation, and the other part of the day, the other 11 hours, is about how do we help our merchants sell more, how do we help them manage their business better, how do we help them grow. And that's a story that you can take back to the regulator in both Saudi Arabia, but equally in Egypt and the UAE, where we're also in business. And I just want to underscore that I'm still on the board of a bunch of fintechs in Europe, and those that fail are those that get overly concerned about the regulator and start moaning about regulations. Oh, the regulator is so tough, and this and that. Those that succeed are thinking, hey, the regulator is tough, that's good news, because that will separate the men from the boys in this market. And we at JDI, or the women from the girls, and we at JDI like to think that we're among the men and the women, and not the boys and the girls.
And from your perspective, just to follow up, how does Saudi Arabia compare, on a kind of, you, as you say, you're on fintechs, you're involved with fintech in Europe, you're here in the UAE, you're also in Egypt. How does Saudi Arabia compare on a business level?
At a business, from a business understanding point of view, Sama is right there, and Sama is very open-minded in the sense of connecting to regulators around the world and listening and taking inputs. At the same time, in all fairness, I think Sama is on a learning journey, just like the fintechs are. There is no question, part of the session is about the potential of fintech in Saudi Arabia, and while there's been an enormous increase and a flight of the sector, and we made huge progress, you can at the same time say that we're nowhere yet. There are markets that are way ahead, the growth path is long, the developments are still long, and that applies to the regulator just as much. There's a lot to learn. They've learned a lot. There's still a lot to learn, but they're open to learning and open to taking that boat from industry participants and from outside the kingdom.
Grant, thanks for patience, and a fifth, but by no means least, on the panel. As a bank, one of the largest banks in the kingdom, keen to transform. So you've got the internal sort of institutional transformation piece, but also keen to kind of push the market to open up. What's it like on the ground? What's the substance of the talk that's being mentioned here about digital transformation and creating a new ecosystem?
Yeah, so thank you. I think I agree with Renier that the future is very bright in Saudi Arabia. It's going to be a lot brighter. There's a lot of change happening all at once. Perspectives as the token banker. So we, over the last few years in particular, I think, albeit a pandemic is a brutally horrible situation, it does have the upside of change. And innovation is probably the biggest thing that's happened in the banking sector and across the globe on the back of it. So I think the big thing I've seen from a bank perspective is the catalyst of that change has forced us to get all of our leadership teams across the bank to start engaging with customers more and really understanding what they want. Traditional banks are notorious for not listening to their customers. They're notorious for just pushing product in the market and relying on their big fat balance sheets. And I think that's one thing that we've been very cognizant of is how do we actually do things differently. So what I've seen in Saudi Arabia in particular, I've lived and worked here now for 10 years across the Middle East region, is massive uptick in terms of that innovation agenda. I think we've got 80 active fintechs in either in sandbox or in production in Saudi Arabia. There's aspirations to get to 250 by 2025. The workforce that are associated with that is significant. But I think if you look at the Ministry of Finance's projections, they're looking at about 6,000 people to be working in that community, right? So for us as a traditional bank, waking up to that, it's do you see that as competition, or do you see that as actually an opportunity to co-create and foster more innovation for what you do? So the biggest thing we've had to do as a traditional bank is change the way we think about partnership. And that's the worldwide. Open banking, so the regulator mandates that are coming down from a regulatory perspective are actually allowing us through a controlled way to open up our data, which traditionally banks don't do. And we're doing that with a view that let's look at it to go beyond compliance. So let's look at how do we change our business model to partner with fintechs, with other industries, to deliver great products to customers. So I think that's the big step change that's happening. I think the investment that's coming in, so us as traditional bank, investing in fintech is something we're very seriously considering now. A few years ago, wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have been seen as a kind of an area that we would put a venture capital fund together and invest. And that's happening across a lot of the Saudi-based banks. And I think lastly, the innovation agenda is allowing our organization to look internally. So internal innovation around how do we look at culture. I think we'll come to this. How do we change the way we do things? How do we move faster? These are very important in terms of that change. And I think now we're seeing it from a regulator and an industry perspective. Traditional banks are now needing to adapt quicker to respond to the market. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we've got to address. And we're too slow, typically.
Thanks for that, Grant. Just to follow up, though, on the 80 fintechs that you mentioned you have in the pipeline, you're looking for more. Are you looking to engage sort of mainly at the local level, or are you looking cross-regionally? Because we have a lot of fintechs here today.
Yeah, so,
at this event.
so one of the initiatives we've been working on is putting in place, building the infrastructure in the bank so that we can collaborate. So we've all been investing as banks in the kingdom in our API infrastructure so that we can plug in, play with other parties. That's also going to support open banking because we need to be API ready to support the open banking agenda and engage with trusted third parties. So one of our major initiatives in our 5-year strategy is launching Bank as a Service, and we want to be the first in the kingdom to do it, and then launch at scale. So it's no mean feat. So we're engaging with the regulator. So you talk about fintechs having to engage with regulator, ecosystem, customers, and internally. We're having to lobby with SAMA, the Capital Market Authority, and also with support with our leadership team. How do we change the business model whereby we can partner with fintechs to international fintechs wanting to launch into Saudi don't need to get a license, they can work under our license. And this is a big shift change in terms of how things operate. So we're getting very close, we're working that through just now. We are enabling a lot of our services as a bank to offer us through APIs to fintechs to power them into the kingdom. So our strategy is to, rather than compete, it's to partner. And that's one of the biggest things that I'll see going into 2023 and beyond. And other banks will be doing the same. Yep. So I think it's a great opportunity. The last one is venture capital. So there's a projection of about 2.5 billion riyals of venture capital coming into the Saudi ecosystem to invest in fintech. So traditional banks see that as a big opportunity as well. So great place to be a fintech to build your business just now. So I would implore you to engage.
So on that note, there must be some fintechs here that are looking at Saudi Arabia as a place to do business or to raise money in or scale their company in. Do we have any questions for the panel? Yeah, we have one. Let's just take one here, and then we'll come back for the final bit.
Thank you very much for taking the question. So my question is regarding the SDRs. So what's your point of view on SDRs and how important role they can play in multipolar world in future, like in next 5 years? So anybody can answer it. Thank you.
Does anybody want to volunteer and answer there? Anybody want to volunteer for that one? SDR. Do you mean, are you special drawing rights or special drawing rights? No. I think it's possibly a little bit above our heads for this panel. Let's talk a little bit now about culture and transformation across the piece. Saudi Arabia is going through sort of multiple layers of transformation. Culture, business, people. Really opening up opening up the economy. Naif, at the level of government and regulation, we've seen open banking this year, quite new. Maybe we can get some reflections on that separately from the other panelists. But how much, what do you think what can we expect to see in terms of the regulatory agenda coming down the line?
I would talk about open finance. I'll leave the open banking for my colleagues in SAMA. There's no doubt that information is gold. With more information available for entrepreneurs, financial institutions, there's more to do. Maybe I would cascade it into 3 points. It requires strong communication between the financial sector and putting the structure in which they would share information in. The second point, by allowing this information, I'm sure there's going to be a higher competition, which will be an ease for any new business to enter while the infrastructure is ready. And the third point, which is maybe supporting the market or capital market literacy. So by lower cost and better customer experience, some unserved segments will enter the financial market.
Nusseibeh, you're scaling your company. It's earlier stage than perhaps TAP or GIDEA. How has the sort of cultural dynamic changed? How are you building the sort of culture in your organization, which is sort of somewhere in between technology and finance? How are you managing that process?
Well, I think that's a very excellent question. I believe in the beginning we had to work on financial literacy, and now we know in the kingdom we have over 95% penetration of mobile phones. So literacy is quite high. We had to educate users from both ends on fintech, how to use fintech, how to benefit from fintech, and that helped us lower the barriers between us and between the market, as well as internally. You have two philosophies. You have people who come from a financial background, who are sometimes quite traditional, and then you have people who come from a technology background who are often very innovative, and they don't believe in the boundaries that are there. And it's usually how do we have a conversation and how do we walk through those boundaries where we can facilitate innovation and building a more efficient financial ecosystem. We've had those conversations, internally, and we've worked very hard on communicating with stakeholders, customers, as well as regulators in that perspective. I think today adoption of fintech is very rapid, and everyone is very interested to have a wallet. Everyone's interested to send money very quickly. They don't want to go through the barriers. And I think the convenience of fintech is what's helping, the adoption and the swift adoption in the Saudi market, given the Saudi market is very young, which is also a plus, compared to other markets. So we see in the next, I think, 5 years, even greater adoption to fintech solutions, but also a greater investment in the infrastructure of the financial market, in partnership with banks, in partnership with the regulators, and so forth.
Thank you very much. Suleiman, do you have a take on the kind of the challenge of sort of the building the culture both internally to scale the company, but also drive sort of a change in consumer behavior?
Yeah, definitely. What we try to, especially we in Intab, since we are operating in 9 countries and we have a good good relation with the group, and we are exchanging the experience between a different country and the support that what we get. We in TAP having this experience and trying to share it with other country. But in Saudi, especially in Saudi, that we are focusing with the regulatory and the process and the vision for Saudi to get more excited and acceptance and enabling services for our customers, which is our merchant, by enabling all the acceptance that we saw in the market, especially for the other international acceptance rather than Visa, MasterCard, our local Mada and STC Pay and other payment method that merchant they are looking for. Yes.
I just wanted to add something. I think this point of culture is not particularly relevant. These changes that we are seeing, they're going to happen. And
are you able to get access to the talent that you need to scale the company?
That's the more interesting part. I just wanted to say something about the pace of change. And Bill Gates, I mean, you have to give it to the man, a very wise guy. He said already in 95 that we overestimate the degree of change that happens in the space of a year, and we underestimate the change that happens over the span of 10 years. And that applies very much to fintech. So we've gone, all of us who are in the sector, we've gone through all sorts of hypes, and they come and go. 1 year full of blockchain conferences, then we have a year of AI conferences, then we have embedded finance conferences, and next year there'll be something else. And we tend to overplay, everything will change tomorrow or by the end of the year. That's not happening. It's relatively slow but very steady. So there's no question that Saudi Arabia or the UAE or Egypt, or pick any country, will follow the same trend as we're seeing in markets that are a little bit further ahead. For me, the more interesting question is about talent culture in this market. We at JDI have spent a lot of time with our team to create a culture that we believe is distinctive, that attracts talent in a local market. And the biggest satisfaction, get a whole, get the music going for that. And the biggest satisfaction that I get is when there's recruits who say, we saw your videos on LinkedIn, or we heard from people what it's like on the inside, and that's why we're interested in working there. A culture that is, by design, very different from the culture of many companies around us. Flat, not siloed, non-hierarchical, where what you say matters, not your job title or how senior you are, or where everyone's opinion matters. And often the way I put it with junior colleagues is, if we speak about your area, who knows more, you or me? The answer is invariably they do. So who should be the one shutting up? Well, that's me, evidently, in that discussion. And that's part of the culture that we are trying to bring about. I tell our people, culture eats strategy for breakfast. If I could choose between a company that has a great culture and a crummy strategy, or a company that has a fantastic strategy but a you-know-what culture, I'd take the former any day. So a disproportionate part of our time is spent creating a company where the best male and female talent of Saudi Arabia wants to work, simply because it's a cool place to be. We're not the best payers, that's the government. Weirdly enough, never been in a market where that's the case, but give it to
that's
Saudi.
The region.
We're not the best payers. We're also not the nicest people, certainly not me, and certainly not all the time. But we're a cool place, a place you want to be. In case you're not working already with us, you know where to find us. Thanks.
So Grant, perhaps thanks for that, Renier. We can. There's only 42 G-IDEA people in here, so discount the clapping.
Rent a crowd.
It's prepaid.
Sorry, 44 people. Grant, perhaps we can sort of just cap off the session really by looking, at both a forward-looking view, but also the culture piece. You're trying to transform again on multiple levels, inside out, and all the rest of it.
Well, first of all, I agree with 100%. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. That's our tagline within our division at the bank, because fundamentally without it, you can have the best PowerPoint decks and direction, and that's at a country national level as well. But unless the people change and adapt, it's not going to happen.
Not going to go very far.
But I think, look, one thing I'd like on the culture piece, I think the word open is the word I'd like to use. And I've witnessed this in both within the bank, within the customers, within the regulator. So we work very closely with SAMA, right? Over the last few years, get invited into sessions now around, we're going to put the new mandate around open banking. That's been done in collaboration with the banks and the ecosystem, right? We've all been feeding into it around what will and won't work. When it comes to innovation, we're actively working just now on engaging with the regulator and the broader ecosystem to look at external parties coming to Saudi Arabia to build out their infrastructure in Saudi to support that innovation agenda. We're all feeding into that. So that spirit of openness. I think that comes to our people as well. So to this panel's point, I think the talent agenda is the most important thing to kind of catalyze the change. My view, it's a war for talent. We as a traditional bank really struggle to attract talent from not only ministries, but the fintechs, right? Because people see that as a really cool, sexy area. But we are doing as much, if not more, in terms of transformation and projects that require that skill set. And it doesn't exist at the scale that's needed in Saudi just now. So engineering, digital product, designers, data scientists, all these skill sets that you require to be digital and offer great digital products are very hard to come by. We've been investing massively in engineering apprenticeship programs, FinTech Saudi internships, banker program, bringing lots of young talent in. But we're also working on trying to open up the bank and the kingdom to external talent. and attract them. And this is where there's some learnings to be had. There's some limitations on getting external talent into Saudi at the pace that's needed. It's too slow. Getting the skills up to the level that's needed across the whole population, it's getting there, but it's going to need a big push to get it to the next level. So that's a few observations.
Perhaps we just go down the line just to close the session. We come back here in a year or two. You know, where will we be? Where will you be? Where will your company be, Renier?
In a year or two, we'll be a public company in Saudi Arabia, and we will have cemented our position as the region's leading fintech. It will also be at a time when we will not talk about fintech much anymore, the way we don't talk about e-commerce. We will be a financial services company, just like there will be many in the region. And I hope that we will be, that will be closest to my heart. If we're a company where other people will go and say, if we can get people from that company to join us, we'd like that, because they really are ambassadors of a certain culture and way of working that is customer focused, but also colleague friendly and development oriented.
Nusseibeh, perhaps you just a perspective on what would you like to see, you know, in the kingdom and for your company of the year ahead? What can we expect?
Well, I think we look forward to the changes in the kingdom, and I think in 2 years you'll probably see us entering new markets within the region. You'll see us have a wider and larger market share in terms of SME financing and the leader in SME financing, as well as, you know, the fintech of choice for investors from the other side. We very much look forward to introducing new technologies in terms of the infrastructure and widening our reach in terms of alternative investment products.
Thank you very much. Suleiman, new products, new solutions, new entry points into the e-commerce space for you, or what does the future hold in the next year or two?
What we see to continue to be one single contract, one single integration, and one single support for the region, and for specifically for Saudi, and supporting our merchant and customer, following the vision for Saudi and the regulator SAMA, and increasing the number of and the percentage to reach the goals that for the vision for the digital acceptance payment in Saudi market.
Very much. Should be working.
I think for the regulator, we don't have the ambition my colleagues have for expanding and new products, but we welcome them really. We welcome alternatives, investment solutions. We welcome the dialogue between the entrepreneurs who are coming to the FinTech Lab. We welcome the dialogue with the region and other hubs in the region as well, in the UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, the GCC, as we are looking forward to make Saudi Arabia and also the region as a global hub for fintech.
Let's leave it there. Thank you all for joining us. Please thank my panelists today. Thank you very much, guys. Great work.
Thank you so much, Simon, and thank you so much to the panelists. Yet another really relevant topic. And to conclude, I mean, the war on talents also implies you need a healthy culture, and you also need very good leadership. This was the last panel of today. We'll be back tomorrow at 11. And tomorrow we have the CEO of Rapid. I don't know if you know the company Rapid, but they are a decacorn, which is accelerating a unicorn with a $10 billion valuation. And he'll be here on stage to talk about the journey from a startup to a decacorn and many other things. Thank you so much for being a great audience, and see you all tomorrow. Thank you.